Good morning. Welcome to our class together again. Today we're in John chapter 4 as we continue our study with the Gospel of John. I want to ask you a simple question, one that perhaps you don't answer very often. Maybe you do answer it. I'm going to ask it anyway. What are you afraid of? There are a lot of people that are afraid of a lot of things. Some people are afraid of spiders. They cannot stand the sight of them, much less having them crawl on them. There are some people who are afraid of the dark. Other people are afraid of being in open places. But let me tell you one that I think that most Christians I have dealt with over the years, I have discovered they all share this same fear. The fear they have is, how do I talk to someone about faith? Now, what's interesting about that is they will do almost anything to avoid the discussion about faith. That they're not the right person, or they've got this problem or that problem, or something needs to happen. I find it interesting that in the church, we love evangelism as long as it's corporate. And what I mean by that, as long as the church does it, or they employ someone who'll do it for us, or we can just pay our money and get on with it. But we don't believe in personal evangelism, because that means I have to teach somebody else. And that is too frightening. That is too difficult. And I don't want to have anything to do with that problem. So, what is the problem anyway? Well, let me see if I can encapsulate this into three basic ones that I have heard throughout my ministry. The first is, I am afraid that people will reject me. Rejection hurts. I don't like it. I want people to love me. I want people to care for me. And besides that, if I have a good relationship with them, I don't want to damage that relationship. And sometimes we even build it up into something massive, like they will throw stones at me. No, it won't ever happen. But it's interesting. The reason people get rejected may not be because people reject you, but because they reject the way you go about it. That may be what turns a lot of people off. And we have never thought about the difference between the me and how I do it. And we just say they reject me. It's something we want to touch on today. Secondly, I don't know enough. Now, I'm always flabbergasted by that, because there are people who have sat in Bible classes all their lives. They've sat through hundreds of thousands of sermons. They can tell you every fact in the Bible, but when it comes down to teaching the Bible to someone else, they'll go, I don't know enough. And if you ask them, what do you need to know? And they go, I don't know, but I don't know enough. It's a very convenient excuse, because it betrays the fact that we think we have to have this vast storehouse of knowledge, and that we have to be able to meet every particular objection that people may have, or problem they may bring up, or if they ask you a question that you cannot answer, you don't know what to do with it. Well, none of those are accurate when you really get down to brass tacks. Things happen, you handle them. Jesus did. I think he can show us as well. The third is, I don't know where to start. One of the big problems with procrastination is it is so undefined, and we don't take the first step. So we don't know. We go and say the whole thing and say, we got to do all of this, when maybe you just need to do one simple thing. Today, if we watch Jesus do what he does with a woman at the well in Samaria, we get a chance to see what he does in a very particular way. He gives us the blueprint, if you will, on how to approach people about faith and faith issues without being objectionable, without being overbearing, and without being preachy. And so let's go to John chapter 4, because Jesus is going to provide an answer to all those questions if we want to hear them. So turn your Bible to John 4, and I'll share with you this way on the screen. First of all, this story begins with Jesus making a journey. It says, now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, Although Jesus himself did not baptize, but only his disciples, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee. And he had to pass through Samaria. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. So Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour of the day. Here we have the setup of this chapter. Jesus is tired. He is making a journey. It is not his time yet to do the battle with the Pharisees, and so he is going back to Nazareth and going back to Galilee, but he's tired. He's gone through Samaria. It says, and in fact, one of the things it says is, I must go through. He had to go through Samaria. Why? Well, it's a couple of reasons, I suppose. Most Jews would make their way around it. They would go on the east side of the Jordan and head up the Jordan River so they could avoid the dirty, horrid Samaritans that they despised so badly. Jesus was either in a great hurry or it was always part of his mission to go where he had not been before, to tell people who he was. I suspect the necessity there was driven by the passion for trying to reach people. He settles in a little place called Sychar. Sychar is a town that used to be called Shiloh. Shiloh was a place of great history. It is where the tabernacle was kept during the time of the judges. But prior to the building of the temple, Shiloh was a very prominent place, and it serves that history quite well. Jesus comes to there. It was moved after the Assyrian captivity to a place just north of it. It sits in the shadow of Mount Gerizim, a mountain the Samaritans think is the holy mountain, much like the Jews would think about Sinai or even Jerusalem, as we're going to see. Several things are important about Sychar. First of all, Jesus sits down beside a well, a famous well, one that was dug by the patriarch Jacob. It goes back a long way. It is revered because the hands of Jacob created it. He is the one who dug the well. It becomes a very prominent historical and cultural location for the Samaritans. Now today, if you go to the modern day town of Nablus, which is what Sychar is called today, you will find what is the remnants of the Samaritans. And you'll also find a guide who will show you to a place that says this is Jacob's well. Whether it is or not, we don't know. But everybody in the first century seemed to know where Jacob's well was. A little bit of background about the Samaritans first, because we're going to meet Samaritans throughout this chapter. The Samaritans came about because the Assyrian captivity in 722 BC. They crushed Samaria, they crushed Israel, they carried off half of the population, never to return, and infiltrated Assyrians into the population to intermarry to change their culture. This was the remnant of that. When they began to come back together again to try to reclaim what religious heritage they had, they made a conscious decision to reject what is called the writings and the prophets. Things like the Judges, things like the books of prophecy and the major prophets and the minor prophets, Psalms. The only thing they held to, the only books they had in their Bibles, if you will, were the 5 books of Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. They believed that was the only thing you ought to listen to and nobody else. They had cut ties with the Jews, and the Jews had cut ties with them, and they didn't speak to each other, and they were viewed as the mongrel dogs of the ancient world, and therefore the Jews had nothing to do with them. It will play a part as we go through this. So let's see what happens. Jesus meets a woman by that well. Remember, it's noontime. Noontime is not the best time to draw water because it is hot. It's not the time when people do that. But what we read about in John chapter 4, 7 to 9 is there's a woman from Samaria who came to draw water. And Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." And then John says his disciples weren't there because they'd gone in the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from a woman of Samaria?" And then John explains the Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. They didn't talk to each other. The Jews despised the Samaritans, and the feeling was mutual. But there was more to this story. Women, by tradition, by Talmudic standings, did not talk to another man in public. And so Jesus has committed all kinds of faux pas at this point. He has talked to a Samaritan and has also talked to a woman. And he's only said to her, "Give me a drink." Interesting. A very simple request. "I'm thirsty. Can you give me a drink?" Not much in that statement, but there's more than you can imagine, as we shall see. When you come down to verse 10, it says that Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it was that was saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." And the woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where do you get this living water?" He kind of gets her attention with that. "I'm asking you for a drink, but I can give you more than just a drink of water. I can give you water that flows through the river, that flows, that is alive with action and feeling. It's going to be fresh. It's going to be spring fed. It's not going to be like this water. It's be something better than that." And she says, "I don't understand. You've asked me for a drink, but you don't have anything to draw with. The well is deep, and where are you going to get water? No matter what you want to call it." It pricks her attention, and he starts to getting her thinking. And then she begins to try to reason all of this out. "Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock." But Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I give him will become a spring of water welling up into eternal life." And the woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I may not be thirsty and I don't come here to draw water." He's now pulled her in a little farther. "You mean the water you give will quench thirst and you'll never be thirsty again? And I won't have to come out here to this dusty old well in the middle of the day to draw water? Where do I find this water?" See, she's asking questions. And all Jesus is doing is responding in some way. He's being coy maybe, but he's not. He's giving her all the information she needs as she can handle it. She's a woman in need of water. Wouldn't you like better water than what you can get at this well? I know where you can get it. It's a very powerful statement, a very subtle one at the same time. But Jesus continued and said, "Go call your husband and come here." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." And Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you've had 5 of them, and the one you have now is not your husband. If what you have said is true." I find this little interchange interesting. Jesus knows this woman. He's watched a lot of things. First of all, she's come out there by herself. Women didn't go anywhere by themselves. It was much too dangerous. But she's by herself. She's out at noon rather than the end of the day when it's cooler and it's easier. She's there by herself in a difficult time, because no one in town wants to speak to her. She's an outcast. He says, go call your husband, because if he's going to give her something, the husband better be involved with it so it's above board. But he also knows the woman needs to face her own faults. He doesn't tell her faults. He doesn't start by saying, you know something? You're a pretty loose woman, aren't you? I've heard about you in town, how you've been going through husbands like dirty socks. And now you're with a guy who's not your husband either. What's wrong with you? Now, that's how we might start that conversation. Jesus doesn't say any of that. Instead, he just says, go call your husband. And all of that begins to unfold as he asks the question. The woman now has a desire and has told him who she is and what her problem is. So she says, sir, I perceive that you're a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that it's in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship. Jesus said to her, woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. Jesus is getting too close. And so the best way to deal with this is to change the discussion to the theological dilemma between the Samaritans and the Jews. Let's not talk about me. Let's fight. Now, it's interesting that Jesus could have bit on that and said, okay, let me tell you something. Jerusalem's the place to go, and you guys got it wrong. He doesn't do that. In fact, one of the things he does, he doesn't say that the Jews are right and the Samaritans are wrong, or that the Samaritans are right and the Jews are wrong. He just simply says, I know what God wants. So let's not talk about what the Jews and Samaritans want. He points her to what God wants, not what the popular opinion of Jews are. And everything begins to disappear. And finally, the woman said to him, I know the Messiah is coming, he who is called the Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things. And Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. He finally reveals himself, but only after she has found out. She knows about the Messiah, and she knows what the Messiah will do. And this man sure does match up like the Messiah. Are you the right? Are you the one I think you are? That's an interesting interchange. This whole little chapter is this constant going back and forth. And it's Jesus talking to a woman about her spiritual condition in such a way that she can not just hear about herself, but hear who he is. Isn't that the dilemma? How do you talk to people with problems in such a way they can hear the gospel at the same time? Let me make an observation. My observation is this. Everyone is looking for something in their life, even if they don't know it. Everybody has an itch that needs to be scratched, an issue that needs to be solved, a problem that needs to be resolved. And when you know what the problem is, when you know that human condition is always looking for the answer, because very important. I always like what Augustine had to say. He said, there is a God-shaped hole inside of every man that only God can fill. Every one of us has something we're looking for in life, even if we cannot put our own finger on it. And the gospel is what speaks to that issue. And the reason people need the gospel as much as anything else is the only way they can be whole before God and before themselves is if they find that truth and obey it. How does that happen? Let's take a moment and look at Jesus and the woman and what we learn about reaching people from the little interchange. There are a lot of things in here, far more than I can share today, but these are some that I just called out. Hopefully, that'll help you in some way. The first of all, Jesus doesn't judge this woman. She is not of the highest character. She is a woman who's been going through husbands. She's living in what we would call living in sin at the time he speaks to her. She's an outcast. She's not even a good Samaritan, it appears like. I'd like you to notice something in this whole passage that we read. Jesus, not one time, told her, you are a sinner. Not one time he said, if you live like this, you're going to go to hell. He doesn't bring any of that up. Why? You know, it's an interesting problem, but most people already know how bad they are without being told that again. And if you tell someone they're bad and they don't know it, they'll reject it anyhow because nobody believes them. Everybody will lie to themselves and believe what they want to believe about their self-image. Jesus starts with a woman. He treats her like a human being. He is a man who needs something to drink, so he asks another human being to help him. It's a very powerful thing. When I treat you as a person of worth who can help me in some way, or maybe I can help you in some way. We like the other way. We like to be a little bit more judgmental because it makes us superior. We're better. But the question is not whether she was a sinner or not, but how can she be saved? And to do that, you have to do something else. So you don't start with judgment about who they are and how bad they are or what they really need. You just start as a human being to another human being. But the next thing that you find out in this lesson is that he doesn't teach, he talks with her. It is called conversation. Now, you can always take three different approaches with people, and we've taken all three of them at times with varied results. The first role you can play is the teacher. Here's the teacher role. I know, you don't. I've got knowledge, you're ignorant. If you'll sit down and listen to me, I can educate you and you'll be a better person because I have given you what I know that you don't. Do you hear the bleeding superiority? See, it's fine if you want that teacher, if you have sought them out. But if someone comes to you and says, you're not real bright, are you? But I've got the answer, so why don't you sit down and I'll tell you what you need to do. We all go, not me. And so we tend to say, well, see, people just don't want to learn about God anymore. They don't want to learn about God from someone who thinks that they're more knowledgeable than they are. So the teacher doesn't always work. It might, depending on the situation, if there's already a relationship established, but not always. The second is the salesman. The salesman is trying to make sure he gets what he wants out of you. A salesman needs the sale. He needs to sign the contract. He needs to get the money. Before I recorded this, I got a call from somebody trying to sell me something. I didn't want to buy it. I wasn't even interested, but he called me to try to talk me into buying something I wasn't yet interested in. Does that sound like some of our evangelism? Because we want to say, we need to get you to the baptistry as fast as we can. So as long as we get you baptized, we'll be good. I need to make sure I've taken care of that. The salesman will tell you what he wants to tell you to get you to do what he wants you to do. Jesus didn't do any of that. Not any of it. He wasn't selling this woman anything. He was offering something that she kept asking for. It's different. The last one is a friend. You know why you buy what you buy? Here's how. Someone says to you, you know, I was in this store and they had these clothes and they fit me better than I've ever felt. You know, that I can't imagine. And I think that'd probably be a good thing for you. You'll go try that. You know that? Or you ask someone, how is the washing machine working? Because I need a washing machine. And you bought one recently. How do you like yours? We do it all the time. Because a friend we feel comfortable with. We feel like they care about us as much as we care about them. And we have some form of already established relationship. And when Jesus approaches this woman, he wants to decide, he doesn't try to sell her anything, and he's not even trying to teach her a lot. But he is being a friend that says, let me tell you about what I found works. I know where this water is. And if you drink of it, you won't get thirsty again. And I can help you find it. Sir, show me this water. That's a friend talking to a friend. And for Jesus, he said that's the best way for that to happen. The third thing is that he did not tell what he knew in order to stimulate interest. Now, Jesus could have raced to the end and said, now, do you understand who's talking to you right now? I mean, the very first thing, he could have said, can you give me a drink of water? And she said, why are you talking to me? And he could have said, you don't understand, do you? I'm the Son of God. I'm the Messiah. You know, this woman would go, really? We've had all kinds of kooks go through here calling themselves the Messiah. Instead, he just kind of unravels things a little at a time. So this woman gets the idea on her own and begins to ask the question that he can answer. Where do you get this water? You don't have a bucket. How are you going to get it? You mean I want to thirst again? What is that stuff? And Jesus, all he does is brings a little bit more up, and then she asks. I always like the statement, you can't lead a horse to water. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Now that's true, but there's something that's not really been said in that. And that's what Jesus does right here. It's a statement I like to use more than the first one. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But you can feed him potato chips. If you make someone salty enough, they'll drink the water. Jesus is feeding her potato chips. And the more she eats, the thirstier she gets. And the thirstier she gets, the more she wants to know about this water that he's got. He doesn't have to do a lot of work doing that, does he? Just keep feeding her the potato chips, and she'll keep asking the questions. Also, he doesn't argue about disagreements. You know, she raised that issue about the mountains. It's kind of a smokescreen. When you start getting too close to people, they'll raise some sort of controversy. Why? Because it's easier to fight about what we disagree about than try to really resolve my inner demon. Jesus doesn't bite. What's interesting about Jesus, he doesn't say, I'm right and you're wrong. We're right and you're wrong. We're smart and you're dumb. We know God better than you do. Here's what he says. The day is coming when God says this. He wants her to hear what God says, not what even he says. And he's the Son of God. I always have to remind myself when I talk to people of one thing that's absolutely true. That's this. I may not be right, but God always is. And as long as you keep bringing back to God, it doesn't make any difference what your opinion is, or what your view is, or what your interpretation is, or what you've been taught. You need to bring them back to what God says. And that's all Jesus did in this. I know what the Jews are saying. I know what the Samaritans are saying. What does God say about it? Always bring them back to God and never about you. And you can handle almost anything that comes up. You can always say, I don't know. I could be wrong. I probably am wrong. What does this say? It's really hard to fight against a text. It's awfully easy to fight with a person. So he didn't argue. He just showed. And then last thing is he waits for the right time to teach the lesson. I want you to pay the subtle attention of the long length of this story in the narrative. It starts with the request of, can you give me something to drink? It ends with the revelation, I am he who speaks to you, am the Messiah. But it took a while to get there. He didn't tell anything. He waited till she was able to hear it. There's an old saying that I like that says, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. People have to be ready to hear what you've got to say. There are people that are not ready. I've had people like that in my lifetime, where I've started teaching them and they just rejected everything I said, and I just walk off from that. And then later I'll go back and then they're ready. Or they'll call me one day and said, I've been thinking about that. Can I talk to you? And it's an interesting problem. We tend to think people are ready when we think they're ready. The truth is, teach the lesson when they're ready, not when they're not. You say, but they could be lost. Yes, they probably could be. But you know something? They're going to be lost anyway if they're not ready. If they reject the message you teach, they're still just as lost. But if the possibility exists that when they're ready, they can be taught, that's a different story, isn't it? Now, the interesting thing about this chapter is how it ends. Here is this woman, let me paint the scene, who goes out there at noon because everybody in town thinks she's a terrible human being who cannot keep her life together, and they don't want to converse with her. They don't want to be with her, and so she has to come out in the middle of the day to draw water because she's so isolated. Nobody cares about what she says. Then you come down to verse 39, end of the chapter. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me all that I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days. And many more believed because of his word. They said to this woman, it is no longer because of what you have said that we believe, for we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this is indeed the Savior of the world. Let me ask you a simple question. What do you think the odds would have been had Jesus walked into Sychar and set up as a street preacher saying, "You need to hear the gospel, and I am it. I am the Son of God." What kind of reception do you think he would have received? Instead, this woman is absolutely convinced of who he is. She has gone through the process. She understands what has happened in her own life now. And she goes back into town and tells them about it. And there must have been such a change in the way she was that they began to listen for the first time and they begged him to stay. And because of that, he was successful. There's one great truth that comes out of how you teach people. And I don't know, this is the one that comes out of this passage, and it's hard to prove it in real life, but it's not hard to prove it. But you can't illustrate it very easily. Because the truth be told, someone convinced of the truth by the truth itself is more convincing to others. In other words, the person who has seen it for themselves is much more effective than the person who has it, who knows the answers, who may even have the knowledge. But if someone has come to the realization of themselves, I now understand. I've been amazed because I've watched over the time a lot of preachers, some of the most effective ones I know, were not raised in the faith. They came to it later in life. So when they tell the story, when they preach, they're preaching like, let me tell you about something I have discovered for myself that I didn't always see. There's this built-in credibility that goes along with that. I'm just amazed about that. It's not that they have superior knowledge, but they come by saying, let me tell you what has happened to me because I heard this man. Very powerful witness. It changed the whole town in Samaria. All because one woman sat down beside a well and a man asked the question, can you give me something to drink? You never know where the question leads. So as we start to wrap up this class, what do we kind of reflect on? What do we need to the big global parts that perhaps come to mind? These are a couple things that that caught my attention as I went through this passage. One is that we need to help people hear for themselves, not hear what you think. I'm afraid, and I've done this too. I mean, this confession time for me, but it's true about almost everybody. We want to tell people what we think, how we have interpreted this Bible, what we believe the truth is, and we're going to say, this is the truth because I said so. But the best way is let people hear it for themselves. Don't tell them, let them discover it. Because when people discover something, it gets stronger. I'm always amazed. One of the big secrets to preaching, for instance, I have found over the years, was told to me by one person years and years ago. When people leave a sermon, they need to be able to say, that's what I would have said. In other words, let me tell you what I've discovered. We need to help people discover God, not tell them what we think about God. But then we need to focus on people knowing Jesus, not believing us. Sometimes we invest our egos too much in this enterprise. We want them to believe us. We want them to accept us. We want our opinions and our ideas and our interpretations to be gospel truth to them. And they may be gospel truth, but understand something. If they come away impressed by us and not believing in Jesus, we fail. It's almost like we're standing in the way and they can't see him for us. Get out of the way. Just let them see him. Ask the right question so they see him. Keep the intrigue going so they can ask about him. Don't get involved with fights so they can talk about what God says. Because it's all about, can people come to the end and say, I now know? And that's what our hope is. I'm glad you joined me today. I'll be on vacation the next 2 weeks, so there will not be a recorded class. We'll be back the first week of January and continue with our study in John. Next week, there's going to be a auditorium class for that's for all the adults, and I think it will probably be live streamed. So you might watch all the channels that you would do, including waterview.org, and you may get a class by Lenine Mungia at that time. So I will see you after Christmas and after the New Year's. I hope you have a good holiday and a great day today. Have a great day.